Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, it's Arali. Today I want to talk about some improvements that I would like to see in Guild Wars 2. So when I say improvements, of course this always has like a negative connotation, like, oh, the game sucks and this needs to be improved, blah blah blah. But this is just like quality of life stuff, a little bit of gameplay stuff, certain things that I would like to see redone in order to make the base game better. There's just certain things that have been like left behind in like 2012 that haven't been updated since, and I would just like to see improvements. And whenever ArenaNet does do quality of life improvements, they're usually really good. So here's a couple of ideas that I have. Let me know if you have any other ones that you'd like to see. So the first thing I have is map icons for resources. What do I mean by that? Well, resources being wood that you can log, or plants you can harvest, or you can mine, right? And we have those same three symbols that we use. Yes, in season 3 and 4 we got unique resources and they have their own icons, but I would just like to see the old ones updated for specific resources. So meaning that Mithril gets its own icon, or Orichalcum gets its own icon. I just find myself sometimes when I look for specific resources, I have to look around and it's not always apparent what each resource is by looking at the map, and it would be really nice to be able to do that. So meaning that they could maybe even just change the color of them, so maybe have like the Orichalcum be like a golden color, and maybe having the flax as like a white icon or something. Like just kind of change the colors of them so that as we're walking around the map looking for specific resources, I can tell by looking at the map what the resource is that I'm looking at, and I don't have to like go into the corner or change layers and go right up to it in order to find out, only to be disappointed and not be the thing that I'm looking for. It would be a really easy change, I believe, to implement. It wouldn't take that many resources to implement this change, but it's just something that I would like to see improved, that I feel like for working on legendaries and working on guild halls, there's always specific things that I'm looking for when I look around for resources, and it feels really nice for season 3 and 4, and even Icebreath Saga has it too, where you have specific icons for these things, and we just don't have that for the base resources, and I think it's time that we kind of have that. Staying on maps, I want to talk about map markers. So what I mean by that again is in group content, there's so many times where I find myself when I'm helping out like guildmates, or we're playing together, or we're doing specifically like guild missions and stuff, that I would like to mark something, and I don't always want to use my commander tag to do that. And if I'm in a group setting, the only marker that I have is my personal waypoint, which is like this gray waypoint for myself, and then for my friends it's like this blue waypoint that they see. And I find myself so many times like wanting to put like another marker, and I don't necessarily want to be a commander, and I know there's a lot of people in my guild that don't have commander tags that would like to do the same thing, just kind of mark something. So I don't know if there's some kind of option where you can have it like in a guild party or something where you can do that, but just having the ability to maybe place a few more markers on the map, even if you're not a commander, that would be really nice. I think it would be really nice to help new people out, and if you're completing achievements and, like I said, guild missions and stuff like that. So the next thing is more of a fix rather than an improvement, and it's the mega servers. Now for the people that have been playing a while, you all know exactly what I'm talking about. So I find myself many times going into a map nowadays only to be immediately told that the instance is closing and that I should be going to a new map. The other day I had it where that happened 3 times on a row to me, and I just got really tired of it, and it's happening a lot. And I think it's an underlying issue with the code, I believe, and there's probably like a bigger issue somewhere that is probably going to take a lot of fixing, but it's something that's become very apparent and very annoying over the last few years, like really annoying, where I go into a new map and immediately they're telling me the instance is getting closed. And it's even when I'm like doing guild missions and stuff, and I'm trying to go into new instances with guildmates, and then, you know, half of the guildmates are in a different instance, and then my instance is closing, but then the people that are with me in the instance, like I have to tell them as well to close that instance to go to the other. It's just, it becomes a pain, and I would really like to see that fixed. And this is only something that's really popped up in the last few years, I feel like, but it's an issue that I would like to see fixed. So next up, I have some gameplay changes that I would like to see changed. So one in particular is the Ventari tablet. I know that they have tried to fix the Ventari tablet many times, but I think there's still certain things that could be improved upon for Ventari tablet to really make it a good healing spec. I think the whole Ventari line is a great healing spec, but it never gets used. It only gets used for the alacrity, but I would like to actually see it as like a main healer spec. I think it has potential to be really good and to be used that way. The only issue that I have is that in Guild Wars 2, there's a lot of movement stuff, right? Positioning is very important. There's a lot of like ground target where you have to like move out of the way, especially when we're talking about doing raids and doing strikes and stuff and doing bosses. There's a lot of times where you have to like move out of the way and you have to make sure that you're positioning yourself right. And I think that it becomes a pain when you have to do the same thing for the tablet, where you have to like move the tablet on your own. I think it's kind of annoying. So I'd like to see a change where maybe the Ventari tablet moves on its own. And I think the way that it could do that is by like every few seconds moving to the ally that has the lowest health in your vicinity, like in a 1200 range or something. So to have the Ventari tablet kind of move on its own to the ally that has the lowest health and then pump out its automatic healing. And you can still move it on your own by using like the healing skill where you can move it, and it puts its automated movement into like an internal cooldown for a few seconds. Then it can't move on its own, and just kind of have that where it moves on its own so you don't have to worry about it all the time. And I think it would be really cool to see that change. Just I think would feel much better even for people that are starting new or that are just leveling up or whatever, to be able to use that in dungeons and stuff like that. I could really see some use in there because those people are new, and even veteran players. I find myself having a really hard time moving the tablet all the time because I'm not that great of a player, and when it comes to like doing strikes and bosses and stuff, and I've tried to use an alacrity renegade or even revenant, and it's just really hard sometimes with the tablet where I'm just like, oh, I gotta move it like over here and over there, and it just becomes kind of a pain. So I would really like to see some improvements, and I think that like having it move on its own would be really cool. I've been talking about like a healing pet for a while, and I think Guild Wars 2 doesn't really have that, so that would kind of take that place where the Ventari tablet would act almost like a pet, where it just kind of moves on its own and then pump out its healing on its own, and you can still use all the skills as it's moving on its own, but that way you wouldn't have to really worry about it all the time. And like I said, you can still move it if you really need to move it to a specific spot and stuff. So that would be kind of a change that I would implement there. Next up, I have something that I've been talking about for a while, and I actually made a specific video on the subject before, and that's weapon reworks. So recently I made a video for the Elementalist staff, and I had some suggestions on the reworks, on the skills there. And it's really funny because I got a lot of comments from people that said that my changes were so drastic and they were so over the top and way too much because staff is fine the way it is and so on and so forth. But then I also got a lot of comments about people that said my changes weren't drastic enough. They wanted to see much more changes and change a lot of the skills around, and don't just improve the skills, but we want to see new skills and all this stuff, right? So that kind of led me to believe that I think I chose the middle of the road there, where I didn't want to make too drastic of changes because I know that that's hard to implement for ArenaNet and that takes a lot of resources and stuff. But I also wanted to make significant changes to make the weapon feel good now in 2021 or 2022 as we're going into here. So there's a few other weapons that I've thought of that maybe could use some improvements, and I could make specific videos if you'd like to see those ideas that I maybe have. But some weapons that I have thought about is Elementalist Focus. I know that that has some niche gameplay in like PvP and stuff, but I just think that it's really not up to par. A lot of those skills haven't been updated in a long time and they feel kind of meh. There's like the Freezing Gust, which is the water magic 4 on the Elementalist Focus. That's just really terrible. It does a little bit of chill, it does a little bit of damage, it has like a 20-second cooldown, and it really has no use. Chill, specifically in water magic, is so accessible and the damage is miserable, so it's like there's no identity to the skill, there's really no use for it. And that is the one that I always go back to when I think about useless skills, and I think it's one of the most useless skills in the game actually. I think there's a few on the Elementalist Focus that could use some improvement, and I'm not saying all of them, and I'm saying that there probably is some kind of niche gameplay in PvP that could use it, but I would like to just see more versatility for the Elementalist Focus and just bring the skills up from 2012 now into 2022 because a lot of them haven't been updated. Another one is the Guardian Hammer. Now the Guardian Hammer is again kind of held back once again. There hasn't really been that many updates to those skills, and it's just kind of, I don't see people using it. Even in PvP, most of the time you see sword, scepter, staff, staff, like those things have been updated, those skills have been updated over the years many times, and they still hold really well, where the Guardian Hammer hasn't really seen any updates. So I don't think even people use it in PvP or even World vs. World, and I think even the trait that it has doesn't even have any synergy with it, because it deals with like chilling foes and stuff, which like the Guardian doesn't do at all. It deals with burning, so it's just kind of like the opposite, and it doesn't really have any synergy with itself and stuff. So I don't know, I'd like to really see some improvements there, maybe see the trade really change and stuff, and see some new skills on there, maybe with some faster cast times and more damage on there or something. Another one I have is the Necro Staff. Now the Necro Staff being probably one of the most boring weapons. Whenever it's being used, it's always like a secondary weapon that you start off, like most builds that I see have it as a secondary weapon, and they have you start out with it and you place all your marks on the ground, and then you swap to the weapon you're actually going to use for the battle. And that's kind of sad to me, because I feel like the Necro and a staff really goes well together, because it's like a magic based class, but then you never get to see people use that, because even the auto attack is really boring and it doesn't do that much damage. It's a slow moving projectile and stuff. I would really like to see some changes. Not having 4 marks would be really nice. I think keeping a couple of them is okay. I think the second skill is the blood mark, I think is what it's called. That's really nice. Has a fast recharge and it feels really good. Has bleed on there and stuff. And then even the 5 skill, I don't know how many times I've died to someone using that in World vs. World on me with the fear, so that could even stay. But the other ones could probably use some change. Maybe even the auto attack, see some change in there. Just kind of improve on that stuff. It just doesn't feel good as a weapon overall. And then another one that I like never really think of is the engineer weapons. I've said this many times, I don't play engineer really, and recently for the betas I did play the mechanist, and when I went to like look at what people have been saying about the mechanist and the betas and stuff like that, people always go back to the same thing, where they say that one of their utility skills is a kit, because of how the weapons don't really work that well or aren't that good. And I have to agree, because I don't play engineer often, but now that I've done it a couple of times, I really have to agree that it doesn't feel good to use a pistol and shield or even a rifle. So I think that what's missing there is a synergy. I feel like there's no synergy with the engineer weapons. I think that there's so many unique traits on the engineer. I think the engineer is one of the classes that has some really cool traits. They have some really cool effects on there, and there's some really unique stuff, I think. But there's no synergy with any of the weapon sets. Like the explosion line is really cool, but there's like no explosions on the weapons. So there's like no synergy that's being built there. I would really like to see some improvements on those skills, really see some changes. I think there's a lot of cool stuff they can do nowadays with all the animations that they have, with all the cool stuff that they have made over the years. They can really improve on these weapons. So I think there's like a lot of stuff they can change on all of the weapons for engineer, really, if I think about that, and kind of alleviate the problem of always having to use a kit when you're using an engineer. That would be really nice. Now I do want to say, when we talk about weapon reworks, I think that ArenaNet has this thing where whenever they do work on skills and stuff, it's usually like utility skills and like traits specifically when they're looking to make improvements. And a lot of times they don't look at the weapon skills. And whenever they improve weapon skills, it's always like, oh, we're increasing the bleed amount from 1 to 2 bleeds, or we're lowering the recharge of this skill. I really want to see some reworks. I want to see some skill changes. And one thing that I always talk about is the Guardian Staff. I think the Guardian Staff changes that they made, where they changed the 1 and the 2 skill on it, the rest of them kind of stayed the same, but just changing the 1 and the 2 skill really revitalized the weapon, and it's being used everywhere now. I see it in World vs. World, in PvP, in PvE, and before it really only had a use when you were farming, right? Because that was like the loot stick where you would just go around pressing 1 all the time, and now it actually has some usage. And I don't think that that was such a huge change, but just making those little changes to the 1 and Poison 2 skill made it feel so much different and like such a worthy weapon to be used. And I think the other weapons kind of need that as well. There's a lot of weapons that just haven't been updated really. A lot of the skills haven't been updated since 2012, and they really need to look at that kind of stuff and change that. So next up I have Poison. So Poison as a damage condition is kind of being held back, right? It doesn't do as much damage as Burning does, and it also doesn't tick as many times as like Bleeding does, and you don't apply it as many times as Bleeding most of the time as well. So it's kind of in this limbo state, and then it has this like 33 decrease in healing like tacked on there, and it just doesn't really, it has this like weird niche thing where it's supposed to like be used in PvP with the decrease in healing and stuff, but there's so much condition cleanse in PvP that you don't really notice that being usable. Like that's not really a thing that people do just because it gets cleansed immediately anyways. So I would really like to see some improvement there to actually give Poison its own identity. And I do have a couple of ideas that, you know, just spitballing that I could see being used to improve upon Poison. So one is that for every second that a Poison stack is applied, that each second it applies another stack. What I mean by that is if I apply, for example, 1 stack of Poison to an enemy for 3 seconds, that after 1 second it applies another stack for 2 seconds. So now we have 2 stacks of Poison for 2 seconds. And then after another second, it applies another stack. So you have 3 stacks for 1 second. So kind of ramping that up. And it has some synergy with like condition duration. So the longer your condition duration, the more you will stack the Poison. In a longer battle, it'll do a lot more damage. And I think it would be the opposite of what the Burning condition does, right? The Burning is the like burst condition usually. Like when you look at a Firebrand, for example, and they stack a ton of Burning on there, you see those Burning stacks, right? And that's like your bursting condition. They're all damage over time abilities and they're not supposed to be used for bursting, but if you had to pick like one, that would be the one that's like bursting, right? So having Poison be the opposite of that, like the longer the battle goes, specifically against bosses and strikes and all those things, it really ramp up the damage there with having it just like stack on itself constantly. And with long duration, you can have it just like stack so much Poison on there. That's one idea. The other idea I have is kind of leaning towards Guild Wars 1. Guild Wars 1, we had this condition called disease, where if one person would get disease, it would spread amongst all your friends, like in your group or whatever. And I would really like to see that come back, where maybe Poison can take that place. If you apply Poison to an enemy, it spreads around to other enemies. So it would be really cool to see that, because that would give you like an AoE condition that would pretty much take the place of like an AoE condition. We don't really have that. Yes, we have AoE application of conditions, but we don't have one that's really like an AoE that spreads. So maybe having it really spread around, and I'm not saying that, you know, you spread 15 stacks of Poison to all enemies around you, but I'm saying that like, you know, every second maybe it can tick to nearby enemies like a 1 stack of Poison or something, or maybe see a trait that does that or something like that. I don't know. There's some improvements that I really feel like that could be done for Poison. I think it's in this really weird limbo state where it doesn't really do that much. So, and then the last thing I have is underwater Traitline and underwater templates with that. So what I mean by that is I would really like to see a specific Traitline that deals with just underwater combat. And I think that with the template system, that I feel like there could be a template that only activates when we're underwater. I would really like to see that, where this underwater Traitline is just for underwater combat, and we can take the underwater weapons that are now tacked on to other weapons in the regular Traitlines, we can take those out, give them their own Traitline, and really make specific changes to those weapons and to the combat underwater in a specific underwater Traitline, and then have a template that only activates when we go underwater. I would really like to see that. I feel like that would really improve the underwater. I know we're trying to stay away from that, and I know Arena hasn't really updated that, but I feel like that would give them a base to improve upon underwater combat, to really say every class has an underwater Traitline, and if you're looking to make improvements specifically for underwater, they don't have to play with the other Traitlines, because so many times I find that, oh, now we have the underwater weapons tacked onto the regular Traitlines, and if they're looking to make changes for underwater combat, they have to make changes to those Traitlines. Giving it an underwater Traitline to every class and having it not be like an elite or whatever, you can have it on any of the 3 spots that you have available for your build, it would just give so much freedom to have specifically something underwater. And I know that there's some elite specs, for example, that don't work underwater, like Renegade, for example. You can't summon the spirits, so there really isn't a use for that, and you could have that be your third line, for example, when you go underwater, and it's just a template that activates when you go underwater. And it would be another way for them to kind of make money, because they could monetize that and have you buy more underwater templates if you're so inclined to do so. I don't know why you would, but given the option there for people that like to do a lot of things underwater or have different builds for underwater, and just have that activate whenever you go underwater, and then have your regular template activate when you go above water. So giving us the option there, I would really like to see that. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys. If you have any other ideas for changes or improvements or fixes or anything like that, I would love to hear them. And if you'd like to see anything specific on any of these, if you want me to expand further on ideas or really get deep into the weapon reworks, let me know. But that's all I have for you guys for today. If you guys haven't subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you do, and I really appreciate everyone that's been watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.